Happy Easter, everybody. This weekend, we actually join billions of people around the world in the celebration of Jesus' resurrection. But I want you to know my personal prayer has been for you, that you personally would experience God's grace, his blessing, God's help in your life. Now, this weekend is also a pretty special weekend around here at Fox River because this weekend is the first weekend of services at our brand new North Campus. Can we give a shout out for all those that are over at the North Campus? Congratulations there. We are so happy for you. Shout out also to those that are at Muskego and the wonderful things that God's doing there. And of course, for those that are joining with us online, we want to say welcome as well. Now, on this Easter weekend, I thought an appropriate question would be, just this honest confession. Anybody ever get a little confused about God? And I'm not talking about the mysteries of God and everything you don't know. I'm talking about just it's kind of confusing with God about the things that I do know. Because sometimes it's like I'm hearing this about God, and then other times I'm hearing this about God, and I'm not quite sure how they all fit together, how that could work. I think about the God of the Old Testament, the God of the New Testament. It's like, that makes my head hurt at times. Things I know about God. I know that God is holy, and I know that God is just. He is the one that will bring justice and the right judgment to the world. And then at the same time, though, the judge is one of mercy. And how is this working together? And then we throw in this, that God is a God of love. And I look at these and I'm just kind of like, has God gotten a little schizophrenic? He's sometimes this and he's sometimes that. It could be confusing. But when we add this, grace is going to help you to understand how all of these come together. And grace is one of the reasons that we are here together this weekend, because at the heart of grace, you're going to find Easter. Easter, you could say, is the gem in God's ring of grace. Now, how many diamonds we got in the room? Anybody got a diamond maybe on your ring? Can I see it? Let's hold up the sparkle there, right? That's a lot of display that's going on with that. Here's what I want you to do. This week, whenever you look down at your ring and you see the diamond, I want you to think about the grace of God. That's the ring. But then that center stone, that diamond that's there, the multifaceted of it, that would be Easter. Now, for those of us that don't have a diamond on us, you could think of it this way, that Easter is the sun in God's solar system of grace. Not only is it right at the center, but it's that which everything revolves around and we're able to be helped with and through. You see, grace is a big, big deal. The concept, the word grace, it's mentioned 122 times in the New Testament. There's only 27 books or 27 letters in the New Testament. You've seen grace over and over and over again. And here's the truth. The truth is, you will never understand God. You will never understand Jesus. You will never understand the Holy Spirit if you don't understand grace. Series that we're kicking off this weekend. It's Amazed by Grace. And I want to ask you the question, have you ever been amazed by grace? The maxim, or a thread that's going to go through each of these weeks in this series, is this, that experiencing grace is amazing. Our goal isn't to get to the end of these 5 weeks and say, I know more about grace. I could tell you more about grace. I could teach you about grace. Because the theory, and I'm not against theory. Theory's okay. But what I pray for in my life, in your life, is the experiencing of grace. Because it's when you experience it, that's when things truly get amazing. Now, here's something that you need to know when it comes to grace and God's grace. That there's two attributes. You'd say there's two distinguishing qualities. Just say there's two things you need to know about God's grace. Here they are. One, it is unmerited. Would you say that with me? It is unmerited. And two, it is God's power. Would you say power? Power. Two things about God's grace. First, unmerited. That means it's unearned. It is undeserved. You could say this about grace, that grace plus anything becomes anything but grace. These words will become, I think, even more meaningful to us throughout the time that we have together. When the Apostle Paul shared this truth, that it's by grace that you are saved, that is to come to God. It's not of yourself, it's the gift of God, not of works, lest anyone should boast. Grace, it's unmerited. The second thing about grace, not only unmerited, it is also about God's what? Can you say it? Yeah, it's God's power. That is God's personal working, or individual working might be a better term there, and his power that can take place in our lives. Now, this brings us right back to Easter. I love this prayer. In fact, this prayer is what my prayer was generated from for you. Paul, in the book of Ephesians, said this to people that he cared so much about. He said, I pray that you will begin to understand how incredibly great God's power is for us who believe. If you have believed in Jesus, that's the prayer then, that you'll understand this. And he goes on to say, it is the same power that raised Christ from the dead. That's that Easter power. That is that core of grace. Now, if you happen to have a Bible with you, I'm going to ask you to grab it right now. If you've got one on your phone, got a Bible app there, open it up right now as we look at the Easter story and this amazing grace. Mark chapter 16 is where I'm going to take us to today. Beginning in verse number 1, we hear, when the Sabbath was over, Mary Magdalene and Mary the mother of James and Salome brought spices so that they might go and anoint Jesus' dead body. Very early on the first day of the week, just after sunrise, they were on their way to the tomb, and they were asking each other, who will roll the stone away from the entrance of the tomb? When they looked up, they saw that the stone, which was very large, had been rolled away. And as they entered the tomb, now this is where the scary music would start. As they entered the tomb, they saw a young man dressed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and they were alarmed. Now, that's Bible language for it. They were freaking out. And the angel's like, don't freak out. He said, you're looking for Jesus, the Nazarene who was crucified. He has, what's the next word? He's risen. He's not here. See the place where they had laid him. Now, Matthew adds this to that. Suddenly, Jesus meets with them. Greetings, he said. They came to Jesus, they clasped his feet, and they worshiped him. They were experiencing grace. And then Mark ends with these words. So they went out quickly and fled the tomb, for they trembled, and they were, do you see it? They were amazed. They'd experienced something, and it left them with amazement. Now, the word amazed there, it's noteworthy. It's the word ecstasy. And ecstasy in Greek is the word we get ecstasy from. Now, I hope you're not thinking drugs right now, all right? Ecstasy, it means a wonderment. It means an amazement. It literally means this, to be lifted above your normal thinking and feeling. I guess that is drugs then, isn't it? Right? Ecstasy. It's taking you to the experience. When you experience grace, then that's when you're struck with this amazement. In preparing, we asked a few people about what's your experience with grace. And here's what a few people shared with us.
When I think of God, I think we serve such a gracious God, and I think Ephesians 2:8 and how we are saved not by our own doing, but we're saved by the grace of God. And I think God's grace really spoke volumes to me to know that we can find peace and grace through God. when we talk about grace and love, they're the two words that I just seek and sit in the truth of God with. But I come from a Christian marriage that had abusiveness and alcoholism, and grace is amazing. I had to learn forgiveness, and I had to get out of anger. I had to understand doubt and questioning, and, if I'm your child as well, why would this happen to me? All those questions that I think everybody goes through when they're going through their trial. Grace came through music, and it just kind of bathed in it until I truly understood what that felt like through the healing process of leaning in and crying and yelling and all the pieces you do with God. And he healed me, and he healed me through grace. And I am saved because of that. When I reached forward, I wasn't deserving. I was, a messy person. And yet he was like, you're worthy, you're chosen, and I want you. So that to me is just amazing. Well, I think it's just amazing how, God's grace just allowed us to, be able to go to heaven.
The longer that I live, the more that I understand and feel how far short I fall of God's perfection. And so that makes his grace even more amazing when I understand that through his righteous eyes, I have no right to be called one of his children, but because of Jesus, I do. That's amazing.
For me, what amazes me so much about the grace that God has offered us is the fact that we can't do anything to earn it, that it's a free gift, and all we have to do is accept it and believe on the Lord Jesus Christ. We can't earn it, we don't deserve it, but it's still there for us because our God is so gracious and merciful.
Well, through salvation, I personally, in a sense, felt like I was undeserving of it for so long until I walked into Fox River Christian Church, and I realized, just the welcoming, the 20 plus greeters that said hello, I wasn't being carried out by security or nothing like that. It was complete opposite of that. I knew in that moment that, it was time to heal. It was completely time to heal and pretty much just help out as many people as I possibly can through that grace that I've personally received.
I'm amazed every day by God's grace and that he chose me. He left the 99 to find me, and I'm grateful every day.
I was a very small child when I was saved. People always talk about who you were before, and I was in kindergarten, so I don't quite remember who I really was before. As life happened, and some pretty devastating things happened and unfolded in my life, I came to a point where I understood what that grace looked like, to the freedom he offers us from our own sin, from the sin of others, to the peace that he can give you in the deepest, darkest situations, and just all that it means to be really, truly saved by grace.
Would you join me in just saying thanks to these that are willing to open up their lives a little bit and share that with us? I know there are so many other stories here, and I do hope to be able to get to hear from those, and then we get to share those together as well. Now, there's a bottom line for today with regards to grace. Just today, our bottom line would be this, and that is that grace changes things. Now, I want you to think about that again in the context of Easter, that heart of grace there. Good Friday, Jesus is crucified. He dies. And with him, hope dies. And those that were following him and looking to him, the future, it was dark. But then 3 days later, Easter Sunday, Jesus lives. And with that, hope lives. And the future is so much different. See, grace, it just changed things. That's what grace can do in our lives as well. Remember, it's about the experiencing of grace and how that's going to impact us. So if you were to ask today, what could grace do for me in my life? That's kind of a consumer way of approaching it, isn't it? What can grace do for you? There are 3 impacts that I'll just, kind of just skim off the top of how grace can make a change in your life. First one would be this: that grace can bring to you the forgiveness of sin, and actually the healing from sin as well. The gospel, simply, clearly stated, is this: that Jesus Christ died for our sins. That's the gospel. That's the good news. That he was buried and that he rose again the third day according to the scriptures. The reason Jesus died was for sinners, and that would be us. Every one of us have sinned. I got a quote that was sent to me this past week. And the interesting thing about this quote was, when I read it, it bit. I mean, I could say it resonated with me, but it bit first. And then I'm like, I'm so glad that this was shared. Here's what Kayla had said. She was quoting and she said, "You are more sinful than you ever dared believe. And yet you are more loved and accepted in Jesus Christ than you ever dared hope." Now, when I read that, I just read it as, I am more sinful than I ever dared believe. So I'm not preaching to anybody here right now as far as when I say this. This is something I'm like, I am more sinful than I ever dared believe? That bit. But I realized, that's actually true. I am way more selfish than I would ever give myself credit for, because I just want to cover that stuff up. I can be more calloused, unloving, really don't care about others. I can turn a blessing of God into an idol just like that. I really am more sinful than I ever dared believe. And then this truth, and then I am more loved and accepted in Jesus than I ever dared hope. That's grace. It's a change. It leads us right into another thing that grace can bring about a change in our life, and that is it can bring us into personal relationship with God. Now, this is Jesus' prayer for every one of us. It's the reason he did what he did, that we might experience this. And one of his closest disciples, after his resurrection, shared this declaration. John, biographer of Jesus, said this: "But as many as received Jesus, to them God gave the right, the authority, the power to become children of God, even to those that believe on his name." See, God's desire for us is not simply to give us a blanket forgiveness, but actually to bring us into this relationship with him. I don't know if this has ever been, shared with you in this way. I think it's noteworthy and even worth, writing down or, shooting on a post a little bit later. But did you know that Christianity is the only faith that is grace-based? The only one. And remember those words we shared earlier? For it is by grace that you are saved through faith, that not of yourself, it's the gift of God, not of works, lest anyone should boast. This was such a stark contrast to the world religions in Jesus' day. And it's a stark contrast to the world religions today. Because every other world religion then and today, rather than being grace-based, it would be merit-based. Merit means you need to earn it. You need to work for it. And this is the pull that religion has. I mean, it's kind of like the natural feeling, right? Because when you think about God, and if somebody asks you, like, hey, do you think that you're going to go to heaven someday? I mean, what are you going to say? I hope so. And if somebody pressed you a little bit, like, why do you think you'll go to heaven? Why do you think God would accept you? Usually we'll say something like this: because I try to do good. I try to do my best. And what we have in the back of our mind is this: I'm trusting in the 51% rule. 51% rule would be this: of all the stuff you do in your life, you got the good stuff on one side of the scale, you got the bad stuff on the other side of the scale, stuff we don't want to talk about, some of the things we carry shame and guilt over. You hope that there's 51% good, right? Because if you're 51% good, you're good enough, and God's going to accept you. And you're going to be able to make it into heaven. You're going to have life that way. Again, that's just a pull that we're drawn to, and it just seems, like it makes sense to us at first until you get into the part about like how good is good enough. And that in and of itself, that is it is an ongoing, self-torture that you go through. Am I good enough? And usually I'm like, I don't know if I am good enough that way. But grace, on the other hand, grace would be putting our faith and trust in what Jesus has done for us. Religion says you got to do. Grace says it's what Jesus has done. You need to put your trust in him. And this matter of trust, again, this could be a little bit confusing. What does it mean to fully trust in Jesus? Right now I'm back to, am I good enough in this game I'm playing in my head? So what's helped me the most is an experience that I went through. Maybe some of you have too. Anybody here ever gone parachuting? Any parachuters in here? Not many. Okay. How many here would say, I'm never going parachuting? I can. There's a lot of you out there. Well, okay, good news. You don't need to go parachuting to understand this or to get grace that way, but here's how it helped me. So when I decided I was going to go parachuting, you go over and you show up at the jump school and you go through just a little bit of education, and then you get into a plane. And the plane takes off. Now, anytime you get into a plane, there's a bit of trust in that, right? Because you're trusting the plane's going to take off safely and it's going to land safely. All of us, whenever we fly, have that belief there. Because we didn't believe we were going to land safely, we're not getting on that plane. So you get in the plane, and the plane, it begins circling, and it takes you up to between 10,000 and 13,000 feet. And then the door opens that's there. Now things are getting really exciting at this point. You can feel your heart just going dun, 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 dun. And before you leave the plane, here is where the trust test comes to be. Because you're going to get asked a question. And the question is this: will you go? Will you jump? And to do this means, now I was in a tandem jump, so I'm connected to a jump master. He's got the parachute that's on him. Do you trust the jump master with your life? Will you jump out of this plane? Or you can do this. And as I asked them, there's a lot of people that end up doing this. They pay all that money, they get all the way up there, they see the open door, and they're like, I don't trust it. But this is what trust looks like. Trust means I am going to leave what I have been trusting in, that is the safety of this plane, and I am going to put my trust in something completely different, and you jump out of the plane. And if you are willing to jump out of the plane and trust, and you have a jump master that is trustworthy, and I'm going to say, if you're connected to Jesus, this is what you experience. You can experience an incredible joy. Now, do you wonder if I made it home safe? All right, jump that. Trust in Jesus means this. It's gonna cause a lot of anxiety for some. You have to stop trusting in what you're doing, that you can be good enough, that you can earn your way to God. You're going to have to stop trusting in religion, and you are going to have to put your trust completely in what Jesus Christ has done for you, his death and his resurrection. If you will, that's when you can enter into a personal relationship with God. Now, some people, again, they try to hang on to the plane and they're dangling outside of it. This is just torture, right? So don't do that. But don't try to have one foot. Well, I'm going to trust Jesus and I'm going to try and do the best I can there, because in essence, when you're doing it, is you're not fully trusting Jesus. Trusting him is what will bring you that relationship. And if you haven't, I hope that just like that awakening goes, that's what I need to do. One other thing that grace can do, that grace will change in our lives, and that is that it will bring to us the help and the power of God where we need it in our lives. I love these words. Promise of God right here. Let us then have no fear in approaching the throne of grace, to receive mercy and to find grace, that is God's power, God's working, to help when we're in our time of need. See, grace just isn't the start of relationship with God, but grace is how it gets lived out. And that's where grace becomes even more amazing in our lives when we're experiencing this. So, where do you need God's grace? Where do you need God's help in your life? I mean, honestly. Some of us would say, I've just got some mental health things that are just, they just continue to pull me down, and I really need God's help there. Some would be, I need God's help at home. Better husband, better father, better wife, better mother, in my relationship. Some of us, it's just in living life, right? I received Jesus as a young man, so late in my teens. Just living life today. High school, college. Don't you need God's grace? Don't you need help in doing that? And there's help and grace that's available for you. And God says, that's what I want you to have. Because when you experience my help, when you experience my work, and when you experience my power, when you experience my grace, that's when you'll say, it's amazing. So here's what I'm going to encourage us to do this weekend. From this weekend, will you join me for the next 7 days and pray a simple prayer? Even if you're not a praying person, you can pray this prayer. The prayer is this: God, would you awaken me to your grace? Simple prayer. A couple of reminders of it. If you happen to have a wedding ring with a diamond or just a diamond ring there, every time you look down at that, I want you to think, you see the ring, and I want you to think grace. And you see the diamond, I want you to think about Easter. And just pray this prayer: God, would you awaken me to your grace in me? For those without a ring, every time you go out and you see the sun. Now, this week I hear the forecast is kind of dreary. So you go outside and it's raining and, that. So every time you wish you'd see the sun, that's just the reminder, right? Like, oh yeah, like grace. God, would you awaken me to your grace? And I just want you to see what begins to happen in your life and what he sets you up for. Like I said, we're just scratching the surface this weekend. There's so much more help that'll come as a result of this. The other thing I want to ask is, if you're ready to trust Jesus today, and I think you know what I'm saying. Every one of us comes in here trusting in something to earn his favor with God, to be accepted by God. And if it's not Jesus completely, if it's your works, if it's your baptism, if it's whatever, are you ready today to jump? That is, to completely transfer your trust to what Jesus did on the cross for your sin. In his resurrection, the demonstration of God's power and life and forgiveness for you. If so, join with me in this prayer. I invite everybody to pray. God, thank you for your saving grace. Thank you that you give to us what we don't deserve, what we really can't earn, and Lord, how we can experience you personally in our lives, because all of us long for that. For those that are ready today, Jesus, to come to you as one in need of forgiveness, and to the one who has made forgiveness possible through your cross, through the one who has conquered death in your resurrection. For each of those, they're ready to say, Jesus, I'm trusting in you and you alone for forgiveness and ultimately to bring me into relationship with God. If that's your prayer today, would you just lift up a hand? And I'm going to say, would you boldly just lift up a hand to say, I've needed this transfer of trust. Yeah, God bless you. Everywhere, thank you. Just hold up for a second. You put it down. Yeah. For these personal workings, Lord, thank you. For those that we can't see their hands, thank you. And may the amazing grace of you be experienced by us all. That's our prayer. We ask it in your mighty name, Jesus. And everybody in agreement said, amen.